Hi, I'm Guy Lawrence, and you are listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast. If you're enjoying this content and you want to find out more and join me and come further down the rabbit hole, make sure you head back to guylawrence.com.au. Awesome, guys. Enjoy the show. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I am thrilled to be with you. I am thrilled to be with our global audience. I know you reach everywhere on this earth and probably beyond this world. So I'm going to say hello to hello to our global family and beyond today.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for coming on. Now, I ask everyone on the show, Greg, and I'd be intrigued to know what your answer is because you travel a lot. And if you sat on an airplane next to a complete stranger and they ask you what you did for a living, how do you answer that these days?
Well, first thing people ask me that, and the first thing I ask is, how much time do you have? How much do you really want to know? What I generally say, I answer it usually in one of two ways. I'll share with them that new discoveries, science-based discoveries, have overturned 150 years when it comes to the way we think about ourselves, our relationship to the world, and one another. And the new discoveries change the way that we solve our problems, the way we create our relationships, the way we heal our bodies. And then after I say that, one of two things will happen. They'll either put on their headset and start watching a movie, and then I know their conversation's over, or they'll put the headset away and they will say, wow, this sounds really interesting. So that is kind of the way I usually begin something like that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, I was curious to ask as well, how many books have you written now, Greg?
In this genre, I think I've written 14. I'm working on number 15. It'll be delivered in March of this next year.
Amazing.
In this genre. Before I was doing this, there were other kinds of books out there, but this blending science and spirituality together, I think it's 15 books.
Yeah, and what I'm really fascinated with, and I've found, like, from doing so many interviews, was there like a distinct moment in your life or a tipping point or something to make you sort of really get ferocious? Because to write 15 books on this topic is pretty amazing. And
well, thank you for that. And to the disappointment of people that ask me that question, I have to say, there was no trauma, that suddenly triggered a shift in my life. For me, the way I'm usually asked that question is, how did I make the quantum leap that many people perceive? This is the word they use, from working as a scientist in the corporations to doing the kind of work that I'm doing right now. At first time I heard the question, I was a little surprised, Guy, because for me, it was less of a quantum leap and more of a logical progression. It just made sense. So what I'll say is I've been training to be a scientist since I was 5 years old. I'm fascinated by nature and the natural world. I come from a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. And my mother was my supporter and my protector. And she supported my passions and my interests early on. Science and music became my refuge. And both of them are continue to be my passions to this day. When I was 5 years old, my mom and I were memorizing the names of the dinosaurs and the planets in the solar system and the kings of Egypt and the civilizations and the Tigris Euphrates. And I've always felt that consciously, I didn't recognize this until the 1980s, but I've always felt that although the past and the future are separated, obviously, by chronological time, that the experiences, there is a continuity in the experience of the human mystery. And my feeling has always been that if we know where to look into the past and how to recognize what we find, that in the past are the keys to help us not just survive, but to transcend the great challenges that face our lives today. If we know where and how to look in the past, maybe we can transcend the great challenges, move beyond the wars, move beyond the conflict. And so that has driven me for my whole life. When I was working in the corporations, uh, I found myself in the 1980s. These were the Cold War years, which is a very frightening time in
Yeah.
the history of our planet. For those of our viewers that remember the 1980s, it wasn't tremendously public. But what was happening during that time is the two superpowers, the former Soviet Union and I have to say the former United States of America, because neither one are the same country today, they developed the technology and the weapons and amassed the arsenals that had the power to destroy this world many times over. And we all lived under the umbrella of the threat of those nuclear weapons then. And I found myself working in the defense industry for the very industry that was involved in the things that I most wanted to change. And so it was interesting. By day, I was a software developer working on a program. Interestingly, it was called the Peacekeeper program. It was a missile program. And I'll just tell you, I just have to clarify this. The way I arrived at this position, I had applied for a position in an aerospace company to support the space program because I wanted to explore worlds beyond our world. And this was the company that had sent the probes to Mars in the 1970s, the Viking mission. I mean, just amazing science and technology. So they hired me in this company, and they said, you have a job, and they said, but you'll need a security clearance before you have your assignment. And it takes about 6 months. So they gave me an unsecured job, just routine software development. And when my security clearance came through, they said, because of your expertise and because we are in a wartime environment, we are in the Cold War, we're not going to assign you to the space exploration side of this company. We're going to assign you to the defense side of this company. So I went through a lot of personal, it was tough for me personally, a lot of personal turmoil. You know, why me? Why am I here? How can I do this? How can I support this industry? But I'll tell you what happened, Guy. It was, I learned a lot about the way people think during war, about fear. My job was to develop software and then train people how to use the software. And I learned a lot about the way people learn, the way that people think in the classroom environment. And all of those things prepared me for what I'm doing right now. And I utilize them all today. So it was during that time I was developing the software by day, but always in the evenings and on the weekends, I've been a scholar of ancient texts, ancient civilizations. My spare time, I was traveling to countries that were questionable during the Cold War in the Middle East and you know, in the Egypt and South America, Bolivia, Peru, China, Tibet. And there was a point, and I was offering workshops very similar to what I'm doing right now, but I was doing it in the evenings and on the weekends. And there was a point where a supervisor came to me one day and he said something that pretty much changed my life. He said, Greg, you have to make a choice between science and spirituality. He said the two are mutually exclusive, they're incompatible. And you have to make a choice as to whether or not you work for this company or do you work for the people of the world that you are sharing this information with. And it had never been crystallized. Yeah, wow. So, you know, with that kind of language to me before, and it sent me on a journey that lasted a few months. And the outcome of that journey was that I left the corporations to dedicate my life full-time to the things that we're doing now and to marry science and spirituality into a wisdom that is greater in the union of the two, greater than science can be all by itself, greater than spirituality can be all by itself. And I feel that that's important because we're living a time unlike any other time in recorded human history. And I feel like we owe it to ourselves to draw upon every iota of knowledge that is available to us, whether it's the wisdom of our indigenous ancestors or the wisdom of 21st century science. And to bring that knowledge to a place where we can apply it in our lives in a healthy way, to meet the challenges, the unique challenges of our lives and of our world in a healthy way. And I believe that when we do that, it gives us an evolutionary edge that our ancestors never had. So what I mean by that is from my perspective as a student of time, cycles, and history, it's obvious that we are, in fact, living a cycle. We're repeating a cycle of history that we have repeated many times in the past, and civilizations have collapsed at the time where we are right now, when the complexity of our outer world, it becomes unsustainable, and it has to give way to chaos and a higher order. We're in the chaos right now, and I believe the breakdown, the chaos that we're seeing is necessary. The only things that are breaking down right now are the ways of thinking and living that are unsustainable. So as we go through this time of chaos, the choice is, do we fall into the patterns of the past and give way to the lower instincts and to the ignorance of the principles of competition, conflict, struggle, and scarcity? Or do we choose a higher outcome of cooperation, mutual aid is what biologists call it, and sharing vital resources and learning a way to live that is sustainable? So it's a long answer to a short question, but all of these things have laid the foundation for me to offer to the best of my ability and contribute to the best of my ability to where I see us as people, as families, as societies, cultures, and civilization, so that we successfully move through this transition.
Beautiful, so well put. You've triggered so many questions for me already. Do you think we have to have chaos and disorder first to break down to reorganize at a higher level?
Well, I'll tell you, in natural systems, this is the way that nature and evolution work together. So what I'll say is there is always a breakdown of an existing system that gives way to the new system. If the breakdown were not there, things would just continue as they always are. And if it's a good system, it's good. And if it's not, it's not. So the breakdown is necessary. However, the way that the breakdown happens, and this is what we're asking ourselves right now, is our breakdown going to be a crash landing, or are we going to have a soft landing? Right. And we have a choice. Now, we could consciously, in the best of all worlds, if we had a world of conscious leadership, for example, the leaders of this world, the handful of leaders that have the power to make the choices in the world that we're talking about, they could come together consciously. They could sit in a room, they could sit at a big table, and they could say, look, we recognize what the science is telling us, that we're living a time of extremes. It is a rare window of opportunity when the unsustainable systems are falling away. So we could come together and reset. We could do a conscious reset of the way we think about economy, industry, corporations, the way that we think about populations, culture, and sharing vital resources. And we could move through this transition in a really beautiful way that's unprecedented in the world. That could happen. Realistically, is it going to happen? There's so much polarization and so much hurt in the world right now. And a lot of it, Guy, actually stems. We just finished the Sunday, November 11th, was the 100-year anniversary of the war to end all wars, is the way it was billed, World War I. 37 million people lost their lives in the war to end all wars. And we know that rather than ending the wars, it actually laid the foundation for the wars that followed. And there's so much hurt that remains in the world today from the way those wars were initiated, the way they were carried out, and even the way they ended. When the treaties were signed, borders were drawn, creating countries that never existed, with very little consideration of the culture and of the history of the people who happened to be living where those borders were created. So I'm saying that, I'm not judging it right, wrong, good, or bad. It is a fact that we're dealing with today, in many respects, we're still dealing with that First World War. So because of the hurt, the residual hurt from that time, realistically, I think the leaders of the world find it difficult to come together and consciously do a reset. So what we find ourselves in is another scenario. And I think realistically, the way that we're going to go through this is that we will be forced to address the problems only when they arise. When they're in our face and we cannot look away, that's when leaders seem to come together and say, okay, let's fix this, let's fix this, let's fix this. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, you know, which
human nature, isn't it? Like,
yeah, which problem are we going to fix next? So
yeah.
could we transition in a really healthy, sustainable, conscious way? It is possible. Realistically, do I think it's going to happen in the world that we have right now? I don't see it in the foreseeable future, and I'm always open to the change, to the possibility of that change.
Yeah.
Again, long answer to a short question.
No, these are great answers. I'm just fascinated by it all, because even the chaos, it's almost like I can relate that into my own personal journey about that. Sometimes I need to break down to break through, and we can quite often wait. It's almost like things are fractal from myself to my environment around me, to my community, to the nations.
Yeah, I just finished a 4-day intensive with a dear friend of mine that I often present with, and I know you've had him on your show, Dr. Bruce Lipton. And the title of the program that we finished it. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday of this past week. The name of the program is called From Chaos to Coherence, and it's based upon, it is a biological principle. It is an evolutionary principle, and it is a principle in nature, a general natural principle that systems tend to evolve and become complex until the degree of complexity is no longer sustainable. That complexity then breaks down, it gives way to a higher order. This is the key. When the breakdown happens, you don't have to go back to square one and start over. The breakdown can be quick, and it can move very quickly into a higher order of expression if we consciously address the breakdown. If we fight the breakdown, if we try to hang on to the old systems that are no longer sustainable. A perfect example is the economic system. The economic system of the world tried to break down in 2008, 2009 to give way to a higher order. And there was so much intervention that it was actually propped up in a really unhealthy, unsustainable way. So now the global debt is over, I think the global debt is something like 55 to 60 trillion US dollars is the global debt. Now we've all seen nations go bankrupt in our lifetimes. And when that happens, other nations step in to bail them out. The question is, what happens when the GDP of the entire world is less than the debt that the world has incurred? When the debt of the world, collective debt of the world, is more than the collective GDP, that means the world is bankrupt. Who bails out a planet? When that happens, well, we're about to find out, because this is where we are, and you're seeing nations struggle. Brexit is a part of this. The way the Federal Reserve here in the US, the central banks in Europe, they're trying to prop up a system that is no longer sustainable. And we could have already gone through this and be building a new economy since 2008, 2009. As it is right now, we are still in an old mindset of an economy that is unsustainable. Yeah. And we're all suffering from that. The currencies of your country, of my country, they're all being driven, devalued so quickly. It's a race to the bottom. And once those currencies reach the bottom, the question is, what happens then?
What happens then? What do we do?
That'll be another conversation we'll have.
Yeah. So what do we do as individuals? Because, like little old me in Byron Bay in northern New South Wales, if things start to collapse, and obviously there's going to be an external stress starting to affect my
Sure.
what could I do? Is it about taking Yeah.
Well, see, that's the point of where we're going with all this. Things are already collapsing, and this is where we see the stress and the tension in the world. My work, I tend to be a systems thinker. So I like to look at the big picture, as we're doing right now, to see what's happening. And then to focus on the micro moment of my life within the big picture, to see where I fit and where my thinking and where the way I live my life can change in a healthy way. And this is the key. So what we're talking about doing is becoming resilient as individuals and as families and as communities and as societies, so that we can navigate these changes in a really, really healthy way. For me, that begins with an understanding of who we are, what is our individual potential, what are the extraordinary capacities that we have as individuals. And this is the exciting part of I've released a new book in 2017. It's called Human by Design. It is the science that's telling us that we're not what we have been told in the past. We're not the limited beings. We're not the powerless beings. We're not the product of an evolutionary process, as we've been led to believe. The science no longer supports any of that on the one hand, and on the other hand, the science that tells us the good news is not being shared in mainstream. It's not, you're not seeing this stuff in mainstream classrooms, textbooks, cable television, news programs and documentaries. So this is where I think the action is. It is embracing the deep truth, the deepest truths of our existence, because the better we know ourselves, Guy, the better we know ourselves, the less we fear change in the world around us. The world is changing. We're not going to stop it. We have total control, however, of the way that we respond to the change. So the better we know ourselves, the less we fear the change in our outer world. The better we know ourselves, the less we fear one another. The better we know ourselves, the less we fear our own power. And those three things, I think, are the key to the answer to the question that you've just asked. So I'm just going to back up and explain that a little bit.
Please.
We're living something now that the world has never seen. We have almost 8 billion people in the world. Most people know that. But we're living a globalization that we have never witnessed, where the idea of borders and boundaries of the past are breaking down. So we are mushing together populations and cultures and religions and the way that we think, the way that men think about women and the way women think about men, and Muslim and Christian and Jewish and Hindu, and all of the different traditions that have traditionally been separated by some kind of a boundary. It could be an ocean, could be a mountain, it could be a line drawn in the sand, it could be trade, it could be security, but all of those ideas are breaking down. So we're pushing together a global population in a way that we've never done before, and we're asking people to embrace that change through a thinking based upon separation, competition, conflict, struggle, and polarization. And that's why it's not working. So we are what biologists call self-referencing beings. And what that means is we tend to hinge our sense of well-being on the way that we feel about the world around us. Well, that's a tough way to go when that world is changing by the day. You know, when we feel like we got it all buttoned up nice and neat and we understand everything, we got this story about who we are and where we come from and how the world works, and, you know, the Middle East, and, you know, you've got a Muslim world there and you got a Christian world here, and, you know, everything's all nice and tidy. And we say, okay, I feel like I know that world. That whole world is gone. And if our sense of well-being is determined by the order that we have seen in the external world in the past, it's no wonder the world is stressed to the max, because the order is gone. A new order is emerging. But here's the key. The better we understand who we are and what our personal potential is and our individual capabilities, the less we rely upon the outer world for our sense of well-being. And I see this with people in our seminars all the time, as they begin to embrace the power that lives within them, they have the ability to objectively watch the world change around them. And they say, bring it on. It's okay because I'm good regardless of what's happening in that world out there. Now, I'm generalizing, exaggerating a little bit for the sake of our conversation, but this is the thinking that's happening. So where we go with this is the new science is telling us that we arrived upon this earth mysteriously 200,000 years ago. Modern humans appeared in the fossil record. We don't know where we came from. That is the truth of the science. The physical evidence does not support Darwin's idea of evolution, and we've known that for a long time. The new DNA evidence, we're able now to extract DNA from ancient fossilized remains of the beings that are supposed to be our ancestors, compare their DNA to ours, and guess what? They're not our ancestors. So we know who we are not. We don't know who we are. We might have a personal intuitive sense, but the scientific community is at a crossroads right now because they're being faced with new discoveries that overturn 150 years of scientific thinking and Darwin's ideas that we live in a world where nature's based upon competition and conflict. We now know that's not true. Nature's based upon cooperation and mutual aid. We've been told that we're the product of random mutations that occurred slowly, gradually over a long period of time. We know that's not true. We showed up 200,000 years ago, fully intact, with a brain 50% larger than our nearest primate, and the uniquely human capabilities of empathy and sympathy, compassion, the ability to self-regulate our own biology in a way that no other form of life can do consciously on demand. And we haven't changed since that time. So scientists are saying this has led them to what they call forbidden territory, because the DNA that allows us to be who we are appears to be the product of some kind of an intentional act. And they have to say that because of the way the DNA is fused and modified and tweaked, and the fact that it happens so quickly, not slowly, gradually over a long period of time, happened 200,000 years ago. And the result is us, our extended neural network and the 6 layers of our neocortex that give us all of these extraordinary capabilities. So all of this is telling us we're not the product of some accident of biology. And when you begin to put all of this together, we begin to think of ourselves differently. And when we embrace the potential within us to self-regulate, so we have the ability to self-regulate our super immune system, super resistance to, resilience to change, I'll say it that way. The ability to activate longevity enzymes so that while we age chronologically, biologically, we don't deteriorate the way that we've been conditioned to think. Deep states of intuition on demand. I mean, a lot of these things are abilities that have been relegated to monks and nuns and mystics and yogis and shamans and healers and curanderos. We can do them in our living room, and that's what the new book, that's what my work is all about. And when we begin to embrace these realities, all of a sudden, the change in the world, still there, but we begin to feel differently about it because we feel more empowered within our own lives to embrace the change and move with it rather than resisting it and trying to cling to a world that no longer exists. The world that we were comfortable with, that's it's changing by the hour. That world is gone and it's not coming back. So as we begin to embrace the deep truths of who we are, we're empowered to thrive, not just survive, but thrive in a new world that's emerging.
Amazing. If the new science is showing this, why isn't it becoming common knowledge?
Yeah, I can answer that really briefly in 4 words: money, habit, ego, and power.
Okay.
And if you want me to elaborate on those, I can. But that's the reason. The universities. you're not seeing these new discoveries. They're peer-reviewed science. So these are not my opinions. It's not, I didn't channel it from some off-planet entity. You know, it's not my theory or my hypothesis. This is what the science is telling us. The peer-reviewed science, it's published in obscure scientific journals, and these scientists simply do not have a platform. They don't have the opportunity to speak to 3 or 4 or 5,000 people at a time the way I'm blessed to do right now. And they can write a book, and it might be circulated through their peer-reviewed audience, but you're not going to see it on the airport newsstands, you know, on the New York Times bestseller list. So it's not a secret. It's just not being shared widely. Now, I have friends, well, I'll say this. I have friends in the university system who are friends only until we have this conversation. And then I don't hear from them for a while. But they are professors. And one of them is an anthropologist. And I asked him, it's a male, I asked him this question. I said, why can't you share these new discoveries with your young people? He said, Greg, you don't understand. He said, if I were to share the things we're talking about now in my classroom, he said it would invalidate my 40 plus years of being a professor. And I said, actually, I don't think it would. I said it would actually validate the power of science to be relevant in our lives, because science is designed to be constantly updated as new discoveries come along, rather than a static model that we are teaching to our young people now. I said, go ahead and teach them Darwin's ideas, share the new discoveries, and let them make up their minds for themselves. And he said, okay. He said, think how much money it would take to change the textbooks. And I said, man, you're really a dinosaur. I said, your students aren't even using textbooks. I said, the books are all online. You change one place on a server, you update the new information, and they've got it. Done. And he said, okay, well, think of all the class notes. My 40 years of class notes that I would have to change. And I said, man, that's what they're paying you for. You know, that's what they're paying you to do as a professor. But in all honesty, and to respect my friend and others like he or she, some of the other teachers that are there, the teachers can only, in public schools, can only teach what's approved in the curricula that is set forth through the school boards. So you can have peer-reviewed science, and if the school boards don't approve that curricula, teachers are required to teach lies. They are required to teach science based upon false assumptions and obsolete science in their classrooms. And it's happening right now. If you got kids in school, or if our listeners have kids in school, they're being taught, for example, Darwin's theory of evolution as irrefutable science. And any competing science, even though it's peer-reviewed, is not allowed in the classroom unless it's a very forward-thinking institution where they have approved the teaching of, of this information. And it's and teachers come to it. We have teachers in our programs. They come to us all the time, begging us, pleading for a way to share these discoveries with their students. So we develop modules. They're digital, visual, video-based models where they can share bits and pieces. And I think, you know, when you talk about human origins, that's a really touchy one because of the religious implications. And I wouldn't expect that's the first thing that would be shared. But the science that shows that nature is based upon cooperation rather than competition, even if we began there, to bring up an entire generation of young people that look to the model of cooperation as a way to solve their problems. Think how differently those young people would think about themselves and their world. And you know, in Western societies, young people are being inundated by their peers with criticism. And there are problems with what is called cyberbullying, for example, where young people will pick one element of someone's physical appearance. Maybe they've got a skin problem, or maybe, you know, skin's breaking out, or maybe they're higher, they're taller than other kids their age. Some girls develop faster than others, and they've got breasts in 6th grade instead of 8th grade. Or, you know, maybe the men are growing beards in 6th grade, you know, or they're heavy compared to those around. You know, they'll zero in on something like that, and they will inundate through the social media on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram, to such a degree that these young people, if they do not have a rock solid anchor, a foundation that tells them who they are and what their capacities and capabilities are in this world, they end up believing the things that other people write about them because they base their well-being upon their outer world, upon what other people think. And we have a very high incidence in the US of teen suicides, very sad stories of teen suicides because they feel they're worthless in the face of the way their peers perceive them. And those things would not happen in a world where young people are steeped in a very solid understanding of who they are and their relationship to the world around them, to nature, to their own capabilities, that they are empowered to self-regulate. They're not powerless over their own bodies. And when we begin to share, I don't want to go into a lot of detail in the interest of time. That's why I'm struggling a little bit here. But when we begin to share the details of what these discoveries mean to the young people, I mean, their eyes light up, and they have a new sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And I think those two things right there, self-worth, self-esteem, and the idea of cooperation versus competition, that's worth teaching in even if we don't do the part about where we come from. Those two elements revealed by the new science, I think, make this whole curricula worthwhile.
Yeah, it's massive. And I reckon every parent listening to this can relate to everything you just said, no doubt. Do you think it will change? Are you hopeful?
It is changing. And I'm encouraged by what I see. And one of the places where it is, I'm now in my mid-60s. So I'm talking to teachers, many teachers who are at the end of their career. I'm at the beginning of mine. I'm just getting started. So no, but I'm talking to, university professors, tenured professorships, they're retiring. They're going to take that retirement now. What that means is that new young professors are coming online, and they are much more open and feel much less threatened by the new ideas. And these ideas are being shared. I'll give you an example. This is how fast information, the perceptions of information can change. In 2007, I released a book. My publisher, Hay House, released a book that I wrote that was entitled The Divine Matrix. Divine Matrix was the science that is telling us in no uncertain terms that there's a field of energy that connects all things, and that we have direct access to that field through the neurons in our heart as well as our brain. I went to a bookstore to do a book signing in my home city in the Midwest of this big, beautiful country I live in. And I walked into the bookstore thinking because I was in a book signing, thinking my book would be somehow visible on the front shelf, and I didn't see it. And so I started looking around. I couldn't find my book. And I asked one of the employees, I said, "Where is the book that I'm signing?" She goes, "Oh, it's over there." It's in the shelf in the back that's called Occult. So the idea, it was considered occult. Okay, that was 2007. Now that book became a New York Times bestseller. It is backed in peer-reviewed science, based in peer-reviewed science. It is now a university required reading in some university physics texts, both in Canada and here in the US, and it happened in less than 10 years. And one of the things that we're seeing happening is that in many instances, science is playing catch up with what the general population already embraces. And this is one of those places. 9 people out of 10, if you ask them, are we connected, through a field of energy, they'll say, yeah. Well, science had to catch up with that by acknowledging that in the mainstream. So it is now acknowledged, and the book went from being a cult on the back of a bookstore, a shelf on the back of the bookstore, to a New York Times bestseller. There is a made-for-Hollywood movie based upon this book. It's called Entanglement. Instead of particles being entangled, it is about twin brothers, humans, and the human drama of being entangled, one in the military in Afghanistan and one in a university environment, and how their connection serves them and actually saves one of their lives, but I don't want to spoil what happened.
Wow.
So this is how fast the ideas are changing. So you ask, is it changing? It is. And the change, it appears slow, but what I know is it's kind of like if you watch the history of when the wall fell in Berlin at the end of the Cold War. It looked like that happened all of a sudden, but the reality was under the visible spectrum, the circumstances that led to the end of, to the fall of that wall had been happening for quite a while, but they reached a tipping point where all of a sudden it all just came together so quickly. And I think that's what's happening now. When the evidence no longer supports the story, it's time for a new story. And there is so much overwhelming evidence that no longer supports what is called the standard model. So the standard model, where there's a struggle to hang on to this standard model. It's a standard model in physics of the way the universe was formed and our role in it, a standard model in evolution. And there's a struggle to maintain that standard model on the one hand. On the other hand, the new science is evolving. It's being published so quickly that doesn't support that story. That standard model is coming apart pretty quickly.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I'm fully aware of the time, Greg, so I'll wrap it up in a sec, but I just want to add that...
You know, I'm okay. I mean, I don't know what your time is. I can go to the top of this hour.
Beautiful.
For my next interview, if you've got the time, because I know our time's gone very quickly here.
Yeah, it's flying. I'm loving every minute of it. And I wanted to add the Divine Matrix. I read that book cover to cover many times, and it had a great influence in the way I think and I see myself.
Oh, you're the one that read it.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you for mentioning that, and thank you for saying what you're saying now. I'm doing a TV series with a company called Gaia, Gaia TV. And we just finished filming an entire season based upon that book and the new discoveries that have come since then. So it's interesting because the discoveries, the book is relevant, but the new discoveries that have come since that book was released validate to an even greater degree what the book was saying. And I think that's really exciting. You know, sometimes science gets it right on the first time, and then the new discoveries keep supporting that message. Sometimes science is close, and then the new discoveries force science to realign and readjust. The fact that field is out there, the CERN superconducting super collider it straddles the border between France and Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland. Their experiments now, as they have recreated the moment that they believe that the universe began, what we call the Big Bang, they recreate that, and they can see what happened in the first fractional, milliseconds after that primal release of energy is when this field was laid down. And they never knew how to look for it in the past. But the interesting thing was the physicists that predicted the field early in the 20th century, unfortunately, they didn't live long enough to see their predictions validated. But the physicists, and Einstein is one of those, talked about, and John Wheeler, Princeton University, a colleague of Einstein, he was another one. They talked about the existence of the field from different perspectives. And now the new discoveries at CERN are bearing out what it was that they predicted in their models. So it tells us that those models anyway were pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Actually, it goes back to 1887 and the very famous Michelson-Morley experiment that was designed to tell us if a field exists. And the experiment was conducted, and in my opinion, it was poorly interpreted in 1887. And the results based upon 1887 experiment was that there is no field. And for almost 100 years, all of our science was based on the idea that everything is separate from everything else. That experiment was repeated in 1986, 99 years later, under the auspices of the United States Air Force, using better equipment. And sure enough, the field was detected exactly as it was predicted 99 years earlier. It's just that their equipment and their interpretations didn't tell us that field was there. So unfortunately, my and the more not in their in past incarnate anyway. This is the way. This is the continuity of knowledge.
Yes.
I just got a message saying I had an unstable internet connection. Did you get one as well?
Yeah, I did. Oh, you're back.
Okay.
Yeah, it broke up a little bit.
Well, we're stable now. We're good and stable.
Okay. The field's been affecting us, I think.
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to ask you a few questions, Greg, that I ask everyone on the show, and it's a nice way to get to know you a little bit from there. And the first one is, I always ask everyone, what's been a low point in your life, but later in life soon to be a blessing?
A low point that later in life seemed to be a blessing. I would have to say my childhood, coming from, as I mentioned earlier, a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. My father was the abuser. The younger brother, my mom, myself, were on the bad end of that abuse. And during the time it was happening, of course, I didn't understand it. Looking back, I now feel that it was those experiences that formed a lot of my, the way that I learned to look at the world and learned to look at life. I became very self-sufficient during that time, but not to the degree that I won't accept help from other people when I need it. It was during that time, my father left. He finally left the family when I was 10. And when he left, my mom gave me a book. And she says, I think this book, she was a very wise woman. And she said, I think this book may help you get through this time in your life. And the book was by a man, he was a poet. He was called the Prophet early in the 20th century. His name was Khalil Gibran. And his books are classics. If your listeners, your viewers are not familiar with them, Khalil Gibran, Gibran. And this particular book, it was called The Prophet, and each chapter was very brief, maybe a page, page and a half long. And I identified a specific topic and gave the reader a lot to think about. And when Khalil Gibran wrote about work, I lied about my age. I went to work at an early age. I was working in copper mills, copper factories, 12-hour shifts while I was in high school. I was loading boxcars with 50-pound bags of cat food. And all of that was work. And what Khalil Gibran said in that book, he said, work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. And that was such a powerful influence on me that I began to look at every effort that I would expend as a way of expressing my love in this world rather than as a task that I had to complete. And the moment I did that, Guy, I'll tell you, it changed the way I thought about myself and my world. And it was an invitation for me to do whatever I did in a really, really good way. And I don't think I would have had that experience if I hadn't come from the family and the hardships that I came from. So that's an example of looking back and feeling blessed now. But I certainly did not feel that blessing at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you for sharing. Love.
You're welcome. Yeah, nobody's asked me that question, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you could have dinner with anyone tonight, from any time frame, anywhere in the world, to have a conversation with, who do you think it would be and why?
I would love to have a meal with Jesus of Nazareth. Not as a religious figure, but as a very learned man who bridged so many wisdom traditions of the past so quickly. And this is one of the mysteries that the church doesn't really like to talk about. The 18 missing years are missing because a lot of that information was edited from the Christian doctrine, from the Christian texts in the 4th century. He was noted, and I discovered this in my travels. When I went to Egypt, he was noted in the Egyptian traditions because he studied and mastered the traditions so quickly and moved on to study and master other traditions. Normally, it takes an individual an entire lifetime to master these traditions. When I went to India, the same thing. He studied and mastered the Buddhist traditions. And when I went into Tibet, they had records of him walking and visiting the Tibetan monasteries. His name at that time was Isa. and which is Jesus, which is, there's a whole iteration of how the name was changed. But I would like to know, what is it within him that gave him the capacity to not only study, which many people did, but to master, and then to bridge so many of these traditions in a way that allowed him to bring that knowledge to the people of his time in a language that they could understand. Yeah. I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? That would be awesome. And the last thing is that after everything we've covered today for our listeners, is there anything you'd like to leave them with for them to ponder?
Absolutely. Yeah, what I would like to say is we've talked about a lot of the change, but I want you all to know I am an optimist, and I'm also a realist. I've never been more optimistic about our world, the whole world, about my nation, about your nation. And my optimism is based on facts. And the facts are that we now know what doesn't work. And that's good news, because if we perpetuated the unsustainable ways of thinking and living that brought us to the point we are now, and we didn't recognize that they did not work, we'd be in big trouble. But we now know what doesn't work, and we now have at our fingertips the knowledge and the technology and the ability to reset the way that we live our lives and the way that we think. And the question that remains is, do we have the will to do that? Or I'm going to go back to something we did earlier. It takes a lot of work to change the way that we think. Khalil Gibran says work is our love made visible. So the question is, do we love ourselves enough? Do we love our world enough to make those changes? And I think we will know that answer very quickly, because the world that we're about to leave to our children is going to tell us how we've answered that question. That is what I would say to the people that are watching or listening to our time together tonight, Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And for everyone that wants to check out your work, check out your latest book, Human by Design, or even your new book that could be coming out next year, where can we send them?
Our books, probably the easiest way, I don't carry any of them personally. I think probably the easiest way, Amazon does a beautiful job. You can go to our website. You can order through the website, but Amazon's probably the best way to, wherever books are sold. I know in Byron Bay and in Sydney and in Melbourne, the bookstores there are carrying all of our books, because I tour Australia and I stop by those bookstores. And
oh, beautiful.
And so I want to say hello to my Aussie family, my Aussie community. I miss you all, and I'm looking forward to our next tour when we come down there. Watch the website and you'll know when that's going to be.
Do you have any plans as yet locked in for Australia, Greg? Or
I know that it will not happen in 2019, because 2019 is full. We're looking for dates. I think that the soonest would probably be in the spring of 20, but I don't want to start a rumor that's not true. But those are the dates. I need to confirm it with my producer, who lives right there in Melbourne. So
beautiful.
I'd like to come back.
Yeah, well, I saw you in Melbourne last time you were Greg, and please let us know, and I'll sing it from the rooftops if you get anything.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for everything, Greg. I really appreciate your time today. That was amazing.
No, Guy, thank you for our time together, and I just want to send my love to everyone listening, everyone watching, and I look forward to our next. Thank you so much.
Thank you.